Hello, my name is Brandon Cadwell. I'm a student park ranger at Wilsons Creek National Battlefield, and I specialize in living history interpretation. The Battle of Wilsons Creek was one of the largest battles west of Mississippi during the American Civil War. Now, a little background. With the election of Abraham Lincoln, many states began to secede from the Union. Between the April 12th bombing of Fort Sumter and the August 10th battle of Wilsons Creek, only the first Battle of Bull Run had occurred. This was still a major battle in the early parts of the American Civil War. Now, a little bit about Missouri. This was going to be a prize for both sides. It had all of the agriculture in an area called Little Dixie, which is right through here. The Missouri River runs through. That area alone produced more agriculture than all of the southern states combined. Also, it had one of the largest arsenals in the St. Louis area for both the Union and especially the Confederate areas. Now, Missouri secession was something of a hot-button topic for those folks. They had a delegation in February of 1861 to decide if they were going to secede, and they're the only state to have ever had this discussion on an official manner and decided not to secede. By the time this battle culminated, there were a couple different armies that had built. Some of the major players included Nathaniel Lyon. He was a soldier in the Mexican-American War, and before this, he kind of dealt with the Bleeding Kansas affairs years before. He was 42 years old at the time of this battle. He was known for his outrageous temper, but he was very much passionate about the cause of setting people free. He was very much a pro-Union man. He carried a rusty sword, which was almost a signature trait of his, and there were several accounts of soldier conflict. Ones that disagreed with him. He was very much a lead on the front kind of person, commander, and also that if you disagreed with him, he'd let you know how he felt about it and would deal with it accordingly. General Sterling Price he was kind of the co-commander of the Southern forces, which combined the Missouri State Guard, which was a large militia, and some more formidable and organized Missouri units. He was a fighter in the Mexican-American War. At this point, he was a brigadier general appointed by the Confederate Army. He was the 11th governor of Missouri, and during this delegation back in February, he was actually against secession. But because of a previous act by Nathaniel Lyon, what became known as the Camp Jackson Affair or Camp Jackson Massacre, he joined more of the ranks of Missouri than pro-slavery and kind of started fighting on the Confederate sides. And he is the general that commands the Missouri State Guard through this entire conflict. Okay, more than who was here and the specific numbers, we want to kind of focus on why. Because society doesn't change, just the elements around it. What was going on? Everyone thought this was going to be a very quick war. And everyone that had rushed off to enlist to fight for their country, their 90-day enlistments, which was most common at the time, were about ready to come to a close. And that map of Missouri that I showed you, that little Dixie area, that was more of a Confederate area, but everywhere else in Missouri was pro-Union, including the Springfield area. Now, Lyon's tendency, he had been chasing around Price through the state of Missouri for the entire summer. And he wanted to help seal Missouri as a Union state and not let it fall into Confederate hands. These people had been, giving him a hard time, and he wanted to make a point. He wanted to crush them. He wanted to save Springfield and Raleigh specifically to the Union cause. Alright, the battle was actually going to start on August 9th of 1861 instead of the 10th. But what happened is it actually rained. And due to the Confederates' lack of good equipment, they couldn't fight because their cartridges were going to get wet and, giving them the inability to fire. So, General Lyon, with the help of his trusted General Franz Sigel, developed a plan. What they were going to do is they were going to march through the night, get there early morning, and do a surprise attack. And what they decided, because they are outnumbered about 2-1, the Union troops had about 12,000, or not the Union troops, the Confederate troops rather, had about 12,000, and the Union boys had about 5,000 to 6,000, depending on the various accounts. But how they thought they'd be able to do this is Franz Sigel, with all of the artillery, would come down the wire road and then eventually come up underneath, route this area for their first position, and they would bombard everyone into the creek valley, while General Lyon brought his troops a little bit further from the north in order to get them from both sides. This did work. They were very much surprised. They were caught off their guard, but they, as the day wore on, things started happening. Battle, they short on ammunition. They got tired, and things kind of went awry. The general line had captured the high ground in an area that became known as Bloody Hill, all across this area, with Confederates going uphill. There were about 4 assaults that happened throughout the day. It was a 5-hour battle, and ultimately culminating around 11 o'clock, and that was kind of around the end time. But on that 4th one, Confederate forces were able to get through and kind of stop the Union advance, and the Union troops would have ended up having to retreat. During the 3rd assault, General Lyon himself actually went up to fill a gap in the whole. He was someone who very much led through the front lines, and he was killed. He was the first Union general to die in the Civil War during battle at the Battle of Wilson's Creek. Some of the things that are of note are the Ray House. And this is going to be specifically important when we talk about the impact on civilians. This was considered a Confederate victory because they put the Union troops off the field of battle. And that is how victories are defined at this point. I would almost declare it a Union victory from personal study, but why it didn't go over so well is for 2 main reasons. The Pulaski Battery, reenacted down here, they were a proactive unit. During the initial bombardment by Franz Sigel in the early morning, these troops, having no connection or communication ability with their commanders, went ahead, took the initiative, and started giving return fire before Union troops could completely settle. And this kind of put them off their balance, dampening their ability to do a completely surprise attack. And then there's Franz Sigel. Sigel is a Prussian American. He came over and having boasted that he commanded over 30,000 troops. When he moved from his first position to his second, which ended up being in Sharp's cornfield, there were troops coming up at him, and they were in gray. He thought this was the 1st Iowa Infantry that were known as the Greyhounds due to their gray uniforms, but this was actually the 3rd Louisiana unit, and caught them off guard and actually forced a retreat from Franz Sigel. So during these long hours later in the day, General Lyon didn't have the reinforcements he thought and initial support from the south end of the battlefield. The ultimate ending to this was a Union retreat. Samuel Sturgis, after finding out that General Lyon had been killed, took over command and took his troops back to Raleigh to resupply and regroup. From this battle, 5 medals of honor were given out. The casualties are about 2,500, with over 500 of them being killed. This was about 25% of the Union troops' total force, and about 12% of the Confederate Missouri State Guard troops. Now, I talked about civilian impact. Many of the farms on that particular battleground were taken over and forced into being field hospitals. The Ray family that was highlighted on that map, as many as 6 weeks later, still had at least 1 troop down around that area. And because this is a large battle for the time of 1861, before we had things like Chickamauga, Gettysburg, there was a large group of men and horses still on the battlefield. Through this process, it took 3 weeks for them to get off. And through this process, a lot of the decay and remains soaked into the soil and got down into the River Creek. And 2 little girls about a year later died of typhoid. So this had everlasting effects on the civilian community, which is not normally thought of when we think about battles in the American Civil War. Lastly, this battle sealed Missouri from further permanent foothold by Confederate troops, and the Union and Confederate boys, these particular armies, ended up meeting later in early March of 1862 in Pea Ridge, Arkansas, and from that particular battle, never again would Confederate troops ever establish a permanent foothold for the state of Missouri. And from that point on, Missouri was going to be claimed as a Union state.